So by a show of hands, how many of you understood that I said, hey guys, how are you? Good. Well, you see, as a Salvadorian born, I have the habit of incorporating certain Salvadorian words into my daily conversations. By learning about the Salvadorian language, you will be able to understand the Salvadorian culture and how I identify with it. First, I will discuss the Salvadorian language and how its uniqueness makes up the Salvadorian culture. Then, I will talk about how I connect with the culture through the usage of my personal experiences. Well, what is known, the national language in El Salvador is Spanish. But there are certain characteristics that make the language unique. The Salvadorian language can be said to be folkloric since it has many characteristics that make it unique because it's varied. It's said to be varied because in different parts of the nation, people have different ways of expressing themselves for the same object. For example, in the west side of the nation, a container will be called a huacal, whereas in the east side, it will be called a paila. Another example will be that in the west side of the nation, marbles are called chibolas, and in the east side, they're called canicas. These examples make us see how varied and open the culture is, since we notice that depending on the region, people have their own way of using words, thus demonstrating how the culture is open and how it's open to however people express themselves. Another way of how the language represents the Salvadorian culture is because basically the language, some of those words the Salvadorians use have been passed on from generation to generation. In the case with my family, it has become common that we cannot go a day without saying the words cipotes or bichos, pisto, cabal, and chunche, which translates into children, money, the word exactly, and a thing, respectively. Same goes for many of the families that I've encountered here in the United States. They have lived here for many years, but somehow they end up talking the same manner as Salvadorians. Well, you might be asking yourself, well, how does all of this make her identify with her culture? The answer is simple. As I said earlier, I'm a Salvadorian born. While growing up, I would hear the words cipote and pisto and many others very often. So for me, it was extremely easy to build my vocabulary based on that language. And I will communicate with my family using that language as well. Unfortunately, after 8 years of living in El Salvador, I was introduced to a whole new culture. I came to Los Angeles, and for me, it was a completely new culture and a way of expressing myself. I had to adapt my language, and also change my way of speaking, making me forget about the majority of the words that I had learned while growing up, as well as my accent. After 10 years of being here, I can still identify with my culture because I can recall many of the words that I learned. And when my family and I interact, we do so in the Salvadorian way. When I talk that way, people look at me weird because they think, oh, what is she saying? But what I feel is happiness and pride, since I know that even though I spend more than half of my life away from my country, my culture is still embedded in me. And as a family, we still continue passing down certain words to our future generations. For example, with my family, we have a 3-year-old nephew who starting to talk and everything. So we have taught him certain words, and it has stayed with him because from time to time we hear him say those words. So I hope that with the description of how the language represents the Salvadorian culture, many of you were able to understand of what it is like to be able to express yourself in a language that not many understand. And I first talked about the Salvadorian language and the variety that it has due to the many different ways that Salvadorians call different things in the nation. I also talked about my connection to the Salvadorian culture and what my family and I do to preserve the way we talk. Thank you for your time.